Welcome to Inside Israel, everyone. I'm Joel Chasnoff coming to you from Ra'anana. This is episode 99. It's called Parents' Night. And the idea here is to share some insights from back to school night, Parents' Night, from my kids' high school just this past week. My whole philosophy on this podcast in general is that the tiniest little details actually tell the biggest story. And that's actually my approach to the books I write and my comedy. That if you can just take the tiniest slice of life and delve into it and explore it, by doing so, you actually get a really big, you get a really good sense of the bigger picture as well. So I thought I would take these 2 hours that I spent at my kids' high school at Parents' Night and give you some of my biggest takeaways from them, some of the insights I had. And I think by doing that, you can actually get a very good sense of what Israel is like right now, psychologically, logistically, just what it means to be Israeli, to be an Israeli teen or a teacher right now. So I really look forward to sharing that little bit of Israeli life with you. Before we dive in, a couple of pieces of front matter. Number one, a reminder that since this is episode 99, that means that next week is the big one, episode 100, quite a milestone. And I have an amazing interview with Professor Dan Ben David from Tel Aviv University and the Shoresh Institute. We spoke for about an hour about Israel's future. And if anyone knows it's this guy, Dan Ben David, I think is one of the smartest people in Israel when it comes to really making sense of where Israel stands and where the country is headed. It is not an emotional conversation. It's really backed up by numbers and demographics and facts. And that's why I think you will like it so much, because we're so wrapped up in the emotion of Israel right now and for the past 2 years. But to really understand what's going on here, you need to look at it with some distance and with statistically and demographically to understand where the country is headed and what needs to change. He's very adamant that certain things need to change in order for Israel to stay a healthy Jewish democracy. And we're going to talk, of course, about those things as well. So that's a reminder that next week, episode 100, that interview with Don Ben David, that is only on Apple and on Spotify. That will not be broadcast on a live episode. Now, next Sunday, there will be a live episode on Zoom. As always, I will be previewing the conversation and giving you a few things to look out for. So once you do listen to the conversation, you'll be prepped a little bit and know what to keep your ears open to. But the actual interview itself is only on Apple and on Spotify. So if you're not signed up for the podcast there, please do so. So that's number one. Number two, today is the official start of the once a year fundraiser to support this podcast. As you know, Inside Israel is free, and I intend to keep it that way. I don't sell ads. I've actually been approached by a couple places to sell ads over the past year, and I've declined for two reasons. First of all, I don't want to. I really see this as a pure podcast and don't want any outside interference. And number two, I haven't had to, because last year during the fundraiser in the fall, you guys all stepped up and contributed. And so I'm going to ask you to do that again. Again, there's no paywall. I want to keep this content completely free. But of course, there are costs to keeping this podcast running. The engineering, the production, the editing, the sound, all the little unglorious, unsexy things that go on behind the scenes, the research, etc. It costs about $1,000 a month to keep this podcast up and running. So my goal is to raise $12,000 from you, the loyal listeners and viewers of this podcast. And I'm going to make it very easy to give. I'm putting it right here in the chat for those of you on the live broadcast. For those of you listening at home, it's really simple. Just go to joelchasnoff.com. Right there on the homepage, you can scroll down a little bit and there will be a big strip that says support the podcast. Click on the contribute link and you'll be taken to Square. Square is the secure credit card provider that services the podcast. You can give a credit card contribution there. You also have their options how to give by Venmo or Zelle or PayPal. All of those, of course, secure. And 100% of it goes to support the podcast. You might be wondering, how much should I give? Always a big question. I'm going to make that easy for you as well. My suggested contribution is $100. That's less than $2 per episode, less than $2 a week. And if you really do value this podcast, which I think you do, I don't think that $100 is too much to ask as a suggested donation to keep the pod running. Now, of course, if you need to give less, you can. Like any amount helps. The flip side is true as well. And last year we had people give $250, some gave $500. We had a $1,000 gift. So if you see that you are in that category where you are able to give a little bit more, believe me, it really helps me to put this podcast out there if you are stepping up and contributing. I'm not going to spend hours and hours on this. You know what I'm asking you to do. So please just go ahead and do it. You can do it during this episode or right after, but please support the podcast. It really does depend on you to keep this listener supported podcast going. So thank you so much in advance. And now on to today's episode, Parents' Night. So, as I told you, what I wanted to do is just share some of the takeaways I had from Parents' Night at my kid's high school. He goes to a high school called Metro West here in Ra'anana. If that sounds familiar to you, Metro West, yes, it's an area of New Jersey. And almost nobody here in Israel knows why the high school is called Metro West. Although a lot of people in New Jersey do. The Metro West Jewish community actually helped build Metro West High School. So Israelis here call it Metro West without really knowing why. But it's the reason. The reason is that Metro West, New Jersey, supports this high school and helped get it built. It's one of the most modern high schools in Israel. It looks as close to an American style high school from the movies as you will find anywhere in the country. And overall, I'm very happy with the experience my other kids have had there and with my youngest there right now. So here's some takeaways, and I'm going to try to go in chronological order from that night, from Parents' Night this past week. Number one, there was a lot of pre-event confusion. People wondering, are we supposed to bring our kids or not? Now, the reason we were confused, including my family as well, is because in Israel, when you have parent-teacher conferences, you do bring your children, which, when you think about it, is really a no-brainer. I mean, I remember back when I was in school at Solomon Schechter and at Evanston High School, my parents would go to conferences, and then they would come home and tell me what my teacher said, and then if it was something negative, I would argue with them, and they would have to call the school. I really like it here in Israel that for parent-teacher conferences, the kids go with the parents and the kids are sitting there in front of the teacher. And if there's any sort of disagreement or confusion, the kid is on the spot and has to speak up for him or herself. I think it's one of the ways that Israelis instill responsibility in kids at a much younger age. But in any case, there was confusion. Do we bring our kids to Parents' Night? Alas, we finally found out no, it was only for parents. But I just thought it was a little funny that we didn't even know who we were supposed to bring to Parents' Night. Number two, the school entrance. You know, when you think of a typical American high school, when you walk in the entrance, often the first thing you'll see is a trophy case, a glass case holding the basketball trophies, the football trophies, maybe the debate trophies or the medals that have been won in track and field, all the accomplishments and the trophies and the memorabilia that students have won in years past. Well, when you walk into my kids' high school, Metro West, the very first thing we saw were photographs on the wall of graduates of the school who were killed during their military service. There were about 10 to 12 in all. And I couldn't help but notice that the bottom row, 5 or 6 of them, all of them were on or since October 7th. And I know a few of these kids. I can't say I knew them personally and hung out with them, but Dorit, my wife, knows their parents, or we know their names from the neighborhood. So it was really jarring to walk into the school, and the first thing you see are these photographs of kids who graduated high school 3 years ago, 2 years ago. I mean, they should be a sophomore in college, a junior in college, but instead they're buried. They were killed on October 7th or in the month since October 7th in Gaza. And it was just a really jarring shake to remind you what Israeli life is really like and the reality of living here. We often say Israeli soldiers, IDF soldiers, this, that. IDF soldiers were in high school a year ago, 2 or 3 years ago. They're incredibly young, and yet they become adults so fast. And it just jumped right out at me as I walked into the school. Takeaway number 3, the principal's address. So the principal welcomed all of us in a big auditorium. There were a few hundred of us parents there. The very first thing he did was he acknowledged that there are still hostages in Gaza and prayed that they may come home safely. And I must say, at most public events in Israel right now, that is usually how public events begin, by whoever is leading the event by saying "She'achatufim yavo habayta," that the hostages may come home soon, and everyone says Amen. On El Al, that is how they end every El Al flight. The pilot over the intercom, as we're landing, says, "Thank you for flying El Al, and may all the hostages come home soon." It is on our minds constantly, to varying degrees, sometimes very strongly, sometimes not so strongly at all. But he did start out by acknowledging the hostage situation. And he also talked about the impact that the war in general is having on students. And he spoke about how one of the missions of the school this year is not just to educate our kids in math and science and the usual subjects, but to really look out for their emotional well-being. And he acknowledged how hard it is to be a teenager right now. And he even mentioned these are kids who went through Corona when they were in elementary school, and now they're going through the October 7th situation, do we call it? Massacre, as it's unfolded leading into the war in Gaza. There are students in the school now who will be going into the army less than a year from now, next July, next August. So he acknowledged the psychological toll, and that one of the roles of the teachers and the administration is to look out for them. And that received a big round of applause from parents, because I can tell you, as a parent, we're all having it's a hard time for us. It's hard to keep our families psychologically balanced with so much going on, and just the daily situation of living in Israel. It's hard to be Israeli right now, and I've talked about this before on the podcast, and it was really nice to hear the principal acknowledge that as well. Takeaway number 4. A little bit further on in his speech, the principal actually criticized the Ministry of Education. And, I was sort of surprised that someone who is hired by and paid by the Ministry of Education would criticize it, but I also thought it was a bold and brave move, and this received wild applause as well. He criticized the fact that there are many schools in Israel, the Haredi schools, the ultra-Orthodox schools in particular, who receive tons and tons of money, but who are not required to teach a core curriculum. So that the kids in Haredi schools do not learn math, English, science. They're allowed to set their own curriculum, which is often Torah and Talmud based. And I'm not saying Torah isn't important. My own kid, one of the core curriculum requirements they have is Tanakh, the Bible. Torah, Nevi'im, Uketubim, not just the Old Testament, but the writings and the prophets as well. So that's part of the core curriculum. But the idea that the Haredi kids are receiving so much money, but are not required to learn these subjects that will help contribute to the Israeli economy, he called them out on that. And we all applauded very strongly as well. Number 5, a guest speaker came up and talked about a new Young Ambassadors program. We often talk about PR and how bad or non-existent Israeli PR is. And so the idea that the speaker was imparting was that they're starting a new Young Ambassadors program where Israelis in high school spend a year learning how to stand up for Israel, learning how to debate, learning about what it means to engage someone in conversation about Israel when that person doesn't agree with you, They also learn about different cultures and the manners and mannerisms that people have in other cultures. And then at the end of the year, they will travel to a European country. He didn't know which one. And they will meet kids from that country. And our kids will represent Israel and hopefully put a human face on everything that kids around the world are seeing about Israel. So that really struck me as an important step. The idea that we've been saying so long the government isn't doing anything about PR, but now the schools are stepping up and maybe providing some of the future PR spokespeople that we need. Takeaway number 6, meeting our homeroom teacher. So every day the kids start the school day by going to homeroom for about 30, I'd say about 30 minutes. And our kid's homeroom teacher, he introduced himself. I'd say he's about 40 years old, a married father of two. He was really casually dressed, wearing a Keith Haring t-shirt, shorts, and Naot sandals. And he also had long hair that could be in a ponytail, but this particular night was not. And again, I just couldn't help but think of, my teachers back at Evanston High School on Parents' Night never would have dreamed of wearing a t-shirt, shorts, sandals. Maybe they could have gotten away with long hair as a male, but that kind of casual dress was just so strikingly Israeli. He also told us that he might be absent quite a bit over the next few months because he is currently in his fifth, that's right, fifth, number 5. He is in his 5th round of reserve duty. He's currently serving in Lebanon and on the Israeli border with Lebanon. He's a former paratrooper. My kid told me that a few days ago he actually came to school straight from reserve duty. He was in a t-shirt, but then military pants, army boots, and had his M16 with him. Try to think back the last time your kid's teacher in the States or Canada came to school with an M16 assault rifle. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I'm not sure, but it is part of daily life here in Israel. So our teacher explained that he's going to be in reserve duty over the next few months quite a bit. So there might be absences. And alas, my kid's first period class today was canceled because his teacher had reserve duty. And our parents, most of the parents' reactions, it was really interesting to hear the parents' reactions as well. Many parents asked questions about how this reserve duty would affect the kids' learning, or they asked about the computers. Our kids are obligated to have computers this year. Many of the books are on computers, so there's a lot of digital learning. The questions that were not asked were about the curriculum. No one asked questions about what math, what they're reading in English. Those strike me as the questions. I remember when my kids went to day school in the US, those are the questions we would ask, all curriculum based, but that just never came up. I think we sort of leave the curriculum to the school and don't really delve in. I think we also know that we don't have much control over the curriculum. It's set by the Ministry of Education, and that's another reason why the principal was criticizing it, because there's a lot of debate in Israel that the Ministry of Education is, having kids learn the wrong things. We're going to talk about this more next week in that interview with Dan Ben David. But this whole idea of startup nation, it's fragile. And the kids right now in Israel might not be learning what they need to. Actually, let's strike that. Are definitely not learning what they need to overall in order to keep the startup nation going. Again, we'll talk about that more in next week's interview, but that was another one of the critiques that the principal had when talking about the Ministry of Education. Takeaway number 7, and the last one. As I was leaving the school, I really did feel fortunate that my kid is going to this high school. I'm aware of what many Israeli high schools are like, and I know that this one is on a higher level. The teachers truly want to be teaching there. It's a hard position to get to teach at this school. The facilities are modern. It feels kind of like the high school I went to. And yet, I can't help but compare it to the high school that I went to and to notice just how many things are different, which is another way of saying how many things are absent. In Israeli high schools in general, you don't have the sports teams, the clubs, the extracurriculars that you do at a typical suburban American high school. I played baseball, I played tennis. There were different seasons. I was on the school newspaper. I think the biggest thing of all was that I got introduced to theater when I was in high school, and I never would have gone into comedy and writing had I not had the experience at Evanston High School where I could try out for the sketch comedy shows and then get in them and learn how to write and go on to direct that show my senior year. These were all extracurricular activities. Of course, we had drama as a class during the day, freshman year, as an elective, but you just don't have that at Israeli high schools. There's no art, there's no music, there's no theater. There really are no extracurricular activities, maybe one or two, but not that broad collection that American high schools are famous for. For the most part, high school is focused solely on the Bagrut matriculation exams. And that's how Israeli education works. It's really, in America, we talk about, are they just teaching to the test? Are they just teaching to the test? Well, in Israel, there's no mistaking it. They are teaching to the test. They need the kids to pass the Bagrut matriculation exams. Their funding depends on it. And no one is trying to pretend it's otherwise. I mean, yes, of course, they want to grow the kids emotionally and open them up to new experiences. But the point of high school in Israel, let there be no mistake, is to get the kids to pass the Bagrut matriculation exams so that they can have a Bagrut. They can have that certificate when they finish. That is what will allow them to study at a college or university. It is what will allow them to get a job. So anything about the growth of the whole child and his or her inner soul, like I remember from all those school tours I did back when I lived in New York City, yeah, that's not really happening in Israel. And I'm a little sad about that because so much of the person that I am is because of what I was exposed to in high school, whether it was theater or sports or even just the really broad diversity of classes offered in school. And I regret that I didn't take all of them. I regret that I didn't take auto maintenance 1 and auto maintenance 2 because I still have a hard time changing a tire. But they offered that at my high school. Israeli high schools, you don't get that broad collection of extracurriculars or classes. And so, as happy as I am that he's there, I also kind of do miss some of that American high school experience. Now, what I do not miss is the enormous pressure that American high school students are under. It's way, way more, exponentially way more than the pressure that Israeli kids are under. I mean, Israeli kids want to do well in school, but they don't have this thing called college hanging over them the way American kids do. And that is why, I mean, there are many reasons why I'm glad I'm in Israel ultimately, but ultimately, that's one of the reasons educationally why I am glad we're here is that despite what he's missing, I think the pressure is not something I would want for him, and it's not something I wanted for any of my kids, which is actually one of the reasons why we moved here right before my oldest two began high school. Let's move on to the questions for this week's episode. I'm going to shut this off for about 10 seconds, those of you at the live broadcast, and then I'll be right back. This is Inside Israel, and I'm Joel Chasnoff. Welcome back to Inside Israel. We have three questions this week. First of all, a question from Alexis. This one, she writes, is related. No, she writes it's semi-related to back to school night. Joel, you've mentioned before on the podcast that Israeli kids go to school 6 days a week. You've also talked about how kids get out of school very early. What does the time, or how does the time in school of Israeli children compare to those around the world? And I assume what you mean, Alexis, is how much time kids actually spend in school. So again, this is actually something we're going to talk about with Professor Dan Ben David. It comes up in the interview. We hear a lot about how early kids get out of school here, sometimes 12:30, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And on Fridays, yes, they do go to school before high school. They don't, but before high school, they go to school on Fridays, but they're often out by 11 a.m. So it might seem like Israeli kids are not in school all that much. However, as Professor Dan Ben David explains, when you compare hour for hour, Israeli kids are at the average or even slightly above average because we have so many school days. So it's not like Israeli kids are not in school all that often. They go more days, but the hours of those days just happen to be a bit shorter. Good question, Alexis. Okay. Zev. Zev writes in, what are Israelis saying about the murder of Charlie Kirk? Great question. On an official level, the government made some statements about how Charlie Kirk was a wonderful spokesman for Israel and that he'll be sorely missed. And I think that the lights of a certain bridge or certain buildings were lit up in certain ways to memorialize him, etc. I would say for the average Israeli, it's more of a curiosity. It's more of a piece of gossip than it is that we feel we've lost a genuine spokesman. I mean, the adults I know are not talking about it at all. It's mostly teens and young adults who are on social media who are talking a lot about what happened, who the murderer was, and that they finally caught him, and that all the gossip surrounding it. But the sense I get is that Israelis do not feel that we've lost an amazing spokesman. I just, that's not the mentality that we have. I think we feel the battle that we're facing is enormous with the likes of a Charlie Kirk or without, and that we have a long road ahead of us in terms of presenting Israel in a positive light to the rest of the world, no matter what. So it's more of a curiosity that this happened as opposed to us feeling like we lost a warrior who was on our side and speaking for us. Donna writes in, I was floored after hearing the cost for the required driving lessons for kids. Doesn't this mean that households living hand to mouth would not be able to afford a driver's license for their children or for themselves? Yeah, as I mentioned, it's extremely expensive to get a driver's license here in Israel. I think when all is said and done, you're talking about probably close to $2,000, maybe $1,500, $2,000 you're shelling out per child to get that driver's license. I this is one question where I need to admit I'm living in a bubble. I live in Ra'anana, which is not like the rest of the country. Most of the kids I know do get their licenses. Most parents require that their kids pay for part of that. So they have some skin in the game. So they have to work for it and pay for part of their driving lessons. But yeah, it is extremely expensive. And I would not be surprised if there are parts of the country where kids simply don't have the means, don't have the money to get a driver's license. And that's another reason why life here in Israel is so challenging for so many. Again, that's another topic we talk about next week with Professor Dan Ben David is the various socioeconomic classes here and how it's easy to forget that there really are differences and barriers between them. That is all for this week's episode of Inside Israel. Again, reminding you that the fundraiser, the once a year fundraiser for Inside Israel is on. Easiest place to give, joelchasnoff.com. Just scroll down, find the support the podcast strip, click contribute, and all the instructions are there. I really thank you in advance for supporting the work I do and for helping me to bring you this podcast every week. I gotta say, I love doing it. As much as I love hearing from you that you're getting something out of it, and I do get those emails, it means a lot to me. I need to let you know it also means a lot to me to be able to do this, to the point where it's even a bit therapeutic. It's really, as I said, it's hard living here right now, but to know that once a week I can sit down and share these bits from my own life about what it's really like to live here right now with people who genuinely care about Israel and the Israeli situation. It means a lot to me, and I certainly don't take it or you for granted. So to the extent that you can contribute, toda rabah, I will see you on next week's episode of Inside Israel. Until then, lehitraot.